Hey everyone, my name is Naya Brooks, podcast host and producer of the Leila Grace Foundation podcast. The Leila Grace Foundation is a nonprofit organization that provides sexual assault awareness for college students across the country. Its main focus is to provide education, which can reduce the risk of sexual assault on college campuses. Today's topic, we are discussing the Me Too movement. Specifically, has it improved or made things worse for women, specifically women of color in the workplace? Many of you have heard of Me Too, the hashtag that's been all over social media. Contrary to common knowledge, the Me Too movement has existed for over a decade to help women of color, specifically Black women and girls, heal from sexual violence. I know I'm ignorant. I am guilty of thinking that this movement started a year or two ago as a way to bring awareness to women who experience sexual harassment within the entertainment industry. But the hashtag Me Too, the movement, it went viral about a year or two ago. But Tarana Burke has been doing the work for over a decade. And something that bothers me about the Me Too movement is the sensitive male egos walking around and people assuming that the movement is about attacking powerful men. First off, wrong is wrong and violence is violence. If you don't want to get in trouble, don't do the crime. It's just that simple. Secondly, the simple fact that the focus has even slightly shifted from survivors healing their stories and uplifting them to, oh my gosh, what about this man? Oh my gosh, we have to protect him. Oh my gosh, we're going to ruin his reputation. The fact that that's more important to people, it just shows and validates the importance of this movement. So, even though the Me Too movement has got more notoriety, has elevated, unfortunately, sexual violence, specifically in the workplace, it still exists. According to a recent article published by Reuters.com back in December 2019, 10 million people in the U.S. have experienced sexual violence in the workplace. Approximately 1 in 18 women and 1 in 40 men. Less than 6% of the perpetrators have been reported. In the article, it also stated that, contrary to popular belief, workplace violence is not experienced from bosses. Usually the perpetrators are coworkers, clients, and customers. The article also goes on to say that many nurses, psychiatrists, emergency workers, etc. experience unwanted sexual advances and are usually put in awkward situations because in their industry, they're taught take care of the patient versus prioritizing their own well-being. And from my own personal experience, I do sales. I sell health and wellness products. And while it is very flattering to receive a genuine compliment, if it's classy and tasteful, because sometimes as women, we get attention directed towards us, but sometimes it's trashy, sleazy attention. But nonetheless, it's nice to receive a great, genuine compliment. But at the end of the day, it's very frustrating and discouraging when you're trying to conduct business with a man and he is not trying to do business. He's making his business not to do business, right? Because I stopped selling products and partnering with men because oftentimes they wouldn't buy. And then a conversation would shift from the products to, oh, are you single? You're really beautiful. Do you have a man? Or somehow, some way, sex will be brought up into the conversation or my beauty. Like, that has nothing to do with business that we're conducting. So something that really bothers me is when men ask, well, with the Me Too movement as a way to blame women for the trauma and violence that we experience, how do we approach women in a workplace if we're attracted to them without having HR call us? So here are some suggestions that I would offer, because I don't want to offer suggestions to anyone who's a survivor of sexual violence in the workplace, because I have never experienced that. I could tell you to go to HR, but I am aware that sometimes systems and rules are in place and they don't always protect people. Some workplace environments, they have improved to protect people, but that's not always the case. So let's direct our attention towards men. Here's what you can do to approach and date women in the workplace. Step number one, don't do it at all. And this is why I say this, because there is a world full of women. There's women everywhere. Why do you have to date your coworkers? Why do you have to date your clients? So many people in this world. And if your argument is that, oh, I only interact with women when I'm at work, well, that's a sign that you need some new hobbies. You need to stop waking up and going to work and then going back home. Do something after work or do something on the weekends, but you're spending too much time at work. Now, number two, here's another option. Now, if you feel so inclined, like, no, this woman is special, she is gorgeous, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Do not, under any circumstances, start your relationship on a sexual note. Like, don't give her sexual compliments. Don't draw attention to her body. Because I used to work with a man at a school, and he was known for being sleazy and mannish. I mean, he was known for trying to holla, flirt with all type of women coworkers. I would see him eye women's body really sexually when they weren't looking, even eyeing me. You know that you're not discreet if I notice something, because I'm not that observant. So that's how bad it was. So keep your conversations and compliments work-based. Wow, Karen, you did a good job with that presentation. Oh my gosh, congratulations, Tasha, on getting the highest sales this week. Y'all met at the workplace. Keep everything professional in workplace. And then in the event that you all want to go out, okay, but invite her out to a public setting where there will be multiple coworkers, or group settings, a group public setting with multiple coworkers, and make sure you keep your interactions platonic as possible. And at all costs, avoid alcohol, because usually alcohol, coworkers, it won't end good. Everyone can't hold their liquor, and you don't want to be the conversation in the workroom the next day at work. There's so many activities to do that do not involve alcohol. Just saying. Those are those suggestions. So when it comes to ending sexual violence in the workplace, it's a cause that we can fight, but we have to work together to do so. It will require openness, not being so quick to be judgmental, education and awareness from everyone. And it can't just be the survivors doing the work. Everyone has to make an effort to end sexual violence, including sexual violence in the workplace. And for those of you who are new to the Me Too movement, whether you have only a little bit of knowledge or no knowledge at all, that's okay, no judgment. I would encourage you to visit the website. That's Me Too, METOO, M as in mountain, V as in victory, M as in mountain again, and T as in Tirana.org. And look up some interviews with Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement, and also research the hashtag Me Too movement and to see some posts on social media and see what people are talking about. And then outside of social media, I would look up either tweets on Twitter or screenshots of tweets on Instagram. Yeah, that's a thing. People screenshot tweets and look up stories of people, whether it's like end rape culture or end sexual violence, different hashtags along those lines, and you'll see people sharing stories of their experiences with sexual violence or experiencing sexual violence within the workplace. Thank you all for listening to the Leila Grace Foundation podcast. I'm your host, Naya Brooks, podcast host and producer. And I want to end this episode with a speech by Tarana Burke. As I mentioned, she is the founder of the Me Too movement. And this speech was at TED Women 2018, for those of you who love TED Talks. And she's talking about the Me Too movement, how it has evolved over the years, and she mentioned some of the things that I've talked about earlier in this episode. So the name of the speech is called Me Too is a Movement, Not a Moment. And I hope you all enjoy.
I've been trying to figure out what I was going to say here for months. Because there's no bigger stage than TED, it felt like getting my message right in this moment was more important than anything. And so I searched and searched for days on end, trying to find the right configuration of words. And although intellectually I could bullet point the big ideas that I wanted to share about Me Too and this movement that I founded, I kept finding myself falling short of finding the heart. I wanted to pour myself into this moment and tell you why even the possibility of healing or interrupting sexual violence was worth standing and fighting for. I wanted to rally you to your feet with an uplifting speech about the important work of fighting for the dignity and humanity of survivors. But I don't know if I have it. The reality is, after soldiering through the Supreme Court nomination process and attacks from the White House, gross mischaracterizations, internet trolls, and the rallies and marches and heart-wrenching testimonies, I'm faced with my own hard truth. I'm numb. And I'm not surprised. I've traveled all across the world giving talks, and like clockwork, after every event, more than one person approaches me so that they can say their piece in private. And I always try to reassure them. I give them local resources and a soft reassurance that they're not alone, and this is their movement too. I tell them that we're stronger together and that this is a movement of survivors and advocates doing things big and small every day. And more people are joining this movement every single day. That part is clear. People are putting their bodies on the line and raising their voices to say enough is enough. So why do I feel this way? Well, someone with credible accusations of sexual violence against him was confirmed to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. Again. The US president, who was caught on tape talking about how he can grab women's body parts wherever he wants, however he wants, can call a survivor a liar at one of his rallies and the crowds will roar. And all across the world where Me Too has taken off, Australia and France, Sweden, China, and now India, survivors of sexual violence are all at once being heard and then vilified. And I've read article after article bemoaning wealthy white men who have landed softly with their golden parachutes following the disclosure of their terrible behavior. And we're asked to consider their futures. But what of survivors? This movement is constantly being called a watershed moment or even a reckoning. But I wake up some days feeling like all evidence points to the contrary. It's hard not to feel numb. I suspect some of you may feel numb too. But let me tell you what else I know. Sometimes when you hear the word numb, you think of a void, an absence of feelings, or even the inability to feel. But that's not always true. Numbness can come from those memories that creep up in your mind that you can't fight off in the middle of the night. They can come from the tears that are locked behind your eyes that you won't give yourself permission to cry. For me, numbness comes from looking in the face of survivors and knowing everything to say, but having nothing left to give. It's measuring the magnitude of this task ahead of you versus your own wavering fortitude. Numbness is not always the absence of feeling. Sometimes it's an accumulation of feelings. And as survivors, we often have to hold the truth of what we experience. But now we're all holding something, whether we want to or not. Our colleagues are speaking up and speaking out. Industries across the board are re-examining workplace culture. And families and friends are having hard conversations about closely held truths. Everybody is impacted. And then there's the backlash. We've all heard it. The Me Too movement is a witch hunt, right? Me Too is dismantling due process. Or Me Too has created a gender war. The media has been consistent with headline after headline that frames this movement in ways that make it difficult to move our work forward. And right-wing pundits and other critics have these talking points that shift the focus away from survivors. So suddenly, a movement that was started to support all survivors of sexual violence is being talked about like it's a vindictive plot against men. And I'm like, huh? How did we get here? We have moved so far away from the origins of this movement that started a decade ago, or even the intentions of the hashtag that started just a year ago, that sometimes the Me Too movement that I hear some people talk about is unrecognizable to me. But be clear, this is a movement about the 1 in 4 girls and the 1 in 6 boys who are sexually assaulted every year and carry those wounds into adulthood. It's about the 84% of trans women who will be sexually assaulted this year. And the indigenous women who are 3.5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than any other group. Or people with disabilities who are 7 times more likely to be sexually abused. It's about the 60% of Black girls like me who will be experiencing sexual violence before they turn 18. And the thousands and thousands of low-wage workers who are being sexually harassed right now on jobs that they can't afford to quit. This is a movement about the far-reaching power of empathy. And so it's about the millions and millions of people who 1 year ago raised their hands to say Me Too, and their hands are still raised, while the media that they consume erases them, and politicians who they elected to represent them pivot away from solutions. It's understandable that the push-pull of this unique historical moment feels like an emotional roller coaster that has rendered many of us numb. This accumulation of feelings that so many of us are experiencing together across the globe is collective trauma. But it is also the first step towards actively building a world that we want right now. What we do with this thing that we're all holding is the evidence that this is bigger than a moment. It's the confirmation that we are in a movement. And the most powerful movements have always been built around what's possible, not just claiming what is right now. Trauma halts possibility. Movement activates it. Dr. King famously quoted Theodore Parker saying, "The arc of the moral universe is long and it bends toward justice." We've all heard this quote. But somebody has to bend it. The possibility that we create in this movement and others is the weight leaning that arc in the right direction. Movements create possibility, and they are built on vision. My vision for the Me Too movement is a part of a collective vision to see a world free of sexual violence. And I believe we can build that world, full stop. But in order to get there, we have to dramatically shift a culture that propagates the idea that vulnerability is synonymous with permission, and that bodily autonomy is not a basic human right. In other words, we have to dismantle the building blocks of sexual violence: power and privilege. So much of what we hear about the Me Too movement is about individual bad actors or depraved, isolated behavior. And it fails to recognize that anybody in a position of power comes with privilege, and it renders those without that power more vulnerable. Teachers and students, coaches and athletes, law enforcement and citizen, parent and child. These are all relationships that can have an incredible imbalance of power. But we reshape that imbalance by speaking out against it in unison and by creating spaces to speak truth to power. We have to re-educate ourselves and our children to understand that power and privilege doesn't always have to destroy and take. It can be used to serve and build. And we have to re-educate ourselves to understand that unequivocally, every human being has the right to walk through this life with their full humanity intact. Part of the work of the Me Too movement is about the restoration of that humanity for survivors. Because the violence doesn't end with the act. The violence is also the trauma that we hold after the act. Remember, trauma halts possibility. It serves to impede, stagnate, confuse, and kill. So our work rethinks how we deal with trauma. For instance, we don't believe that survivors should tell the details of their stories all the time. We shouldn't have to perform our pain over and over again for the sake of your awareness. We also try to teach survivors to not lean into their trauma, but to lean into the joy that they curate in their lives instead. And if you don't find it, create it and lean into that. But when your life has been touched by trauma, sometimes trying to find joy feels like an insurmountable task. Now imagine trying to complete that task while world leaders are discrediting your memories, or the news media keeps erasing your experience, or people continuously reduce you to your pain. Movement activates possibility. There's folklore in my family, like most Black folks, about my great-great-granddaddy, Lawrence Ware. He was born enslaved, his parents were enslaved, and he had no reason to believe that a Black man in America wouldn't die a slave. And yet, legend has it that when he was freed by his enslavers, he walked from Georgia to South Carolina so that he could find a wife and child that he was separated from. And every time I hear this story, I think to myself, how could he do this? Wasn't he afraid that he would be captured and killed by white vigilantes, or he would get there and they would be gone? And so I asked my grandmother once why she thought that he took this journey up. And she said, I guess he had to believe it was possible. I have been propelled by possibility for most of my life. I am here because somebody, starting with my ancestors, believed I was possible. In 2006, 12 years ago, I laid across a mattress on my floor in my one-bedroom apartment, frustrated with all the sexual violence that I saw in my community. I pulled out a piece of paper and I wrote "Me Too" on the top of it. And I proceeded to write out an action plan for building a movement based on empathy between survivors that would help us feel like we can heal, that we weren't the sum total of the things that happened to us. Possibility is a gift, y'all. It births new worlds, and it births visions. I know some of y'all are tired, because I'm tired. I'm exhausted, and I'm numb. Those who came before us didn't win every fight, but they didn't let it kill their vision. It fueled it. So I can't stop. And I'm asking you not to stop either. We owe future generations a world free of sexual violence. I believe we can build that world. Do you? Thank you.